The cross has been a symbol of hope and sacrifice for war memorials across the United States for many, many years. And yet, it's still under attack. In the second half of the show, we're going to talk to our Chief Counsel attorney, Kevin Snider, to discuss a very important case involving this issue that right now is pending before the United States Supreme Court. But the first half of the show, I want to interview someone with an incredible story where her life hung in the balance because of the fact that she was going to be aborted. It's a very powerful story. She's done lots of speaking, and she's written a book about it, talking about the story and her ministry. I want to welcome to the show now Miss Melissa Ohden, the founder of Abortion Survivors Network. Thank you for joining us, Melissa. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Melissa, you've got your bachelor's degree in social work, but you were led to get into ministry based partially upon an experience that took place a long, long time ago. Tell us what happened. You were almost aborted, I understand.
That's right. 40 years ago, my biological mother, as a 19-year-old college student, had a saline infusion abortion forced upon her. That type of procedure was the most common one in terms of abortions back in the 1970s. But for any of your listeners that aren't aware, that procedure involved injecting a toxic salt solution into the amniotic fluid surrounding the preborn baby in the womb. And the baby would soak in that toxic salt solution, be poisoned to death, and then they would induce labor with the intent of delivering that deceased child.
Right. Now, is it painful for the unborn? Is it it seems like I understand it'd be painful with that salt solution.
Yeah, well, doctors have said it's excruciatingly painful for babies to be poisoned to death and scalded. You'll actually find, pictures of children who weren't as fortunate as I was. If you go on the internet, you'll see the photos, and they're horrific, but they're usually blackened. Their skin is blackened. And, I've heard from more than enough women, Brad, who actually underwent that type of procedure, that it was painful for them, not just emotionally, but physically also, because they could feel their children thrashing about in the womb, yes, fighting for their life.
Yeah, it's so tragic. And yet, when the legislators, pro-life legislators propose legislation to require, that pain-killing medication be applied to prevent the unborn from going through an excruciatingly painful, inhumane death. Groups like Planned Parenthood, these abortion groups say, "Oh no, the NOW, oh no, don't require, pain medication, because then that's recognizing the personhood of the unborn. Let them suffer, let them have pain," and that is the cold-hearted, brutal, cruel nature of the pro-abortion movement, and it's very frustrating to hear about that. But you actually experienced it. That's what's so incredible. You went through it. You went through and experienced that horrific thing happening, and I guess they had you come out. I guess they thought that you were dead when they induced labor, but you weren't dead.
Right. Yes. That procedure usually lasts about 72 hours. The procedure is usually completed within that whole time. So poisoning the child, then delivering their deceased body. But we know through my medical records that I actually soaked in that toxic salt solution over a 5-day period. My medical records actually state that they kept trying numerous times over those 5 days to induce my birth mother's labor, and they just simply were not successful until that 5th day. And so by all means, I should have been delivered as this poisoned, scalded to death child. But by the grace of God, I was born alive.
You were born alive. Now, how far along were you in your development in your mother?
Yeah, this is interesting. The abortionist indicated on my medical records, he estimated my birth mother to be about 20 weeks pregnant with me. Now, whether he was lying or she simply did not show that significantly, we'll probably never know. But when a neonatologist finally looked at me after I was born alive, he remarked that he thought I was more like 31 weeks gestational age.
31 weeks. Wow. That's
31 weeks.
Yeah, that's more than 7. Using my public school mathematics here, that's more than 7 months. So, yeah, that's really sad. So you could have easily survived outside the womb had she had you, and you could have been adopted. But she decided she wanted to kill you, and
Well, it wasn't even her choice. I think this is an important part that we all have to talk about as a society.
Yeah, please, because you're saying that it wasn't her choice. Now, she wasn't handcuffed and gagged and forced into that chamber. So when you say it wasn't her choice, do you mean like she was coerced, she was deceived, told that it was just 1 month along and just a blob of cells? Because I've heard abortion clinics use that line all the time.
Yeah, well, ours is a pretty complex case. When I found out about surviving the abortion, I was 14, and then I didn't find out really until I was, about 35, some of the other details of the abortion procedure. And, sadly, what I learned about 5 years ago is that it was my grandmother, my birth mother's mother, who was a prominent nurse in their community. With the help of her friend and colleague, the local abortionist. They drugged up my biological mother so she was incapacitated, unable to fight back, unable to run away, placed her in the hospital.
Oh, that is, well, you're right. Then, she literally had no choice. Her choice was taken away when she was drugged, and this took place. And yet, this was a terrible thing that took place. You have the scars of that to this day, physically, correct?
No real physical scars. When I first survived, they actually thought I had a fatal heart defect. I suffered from seizures. I had, severe respiratory and liver problems like many premature infants. They thought I was going to be blind, probably deaf. The list could go on and on. But I am perfectly healthy today.
Praise God.
Of course, what I do have are the emotional and the spiritual scars.
Right. Yeah. No, that is incredible. Now, when you found out about this, you say you were 14 years old, right? How did you? How did you find out about it, and how did you deal with it?
I found out by complete and utter mistake.
Okay.
My adoptive parents knew about the abortion procedure when they adopted me. Of course, they were told all the terrible things about what my life could potentially look like, and they didn't care one bit.
Right.
But they kept it a secret, knowing that it could change my life to know that. But when I was 14, my older sister, as a high school student, faced an unplanned pregnancy. Was considering all of her options, which included abortion. And so our parents, when they found that out, actually told her the story of my survival because they wanted her to understand what kind of decision she was considering. And so my sister was told the story of my survival, and during an argument with me one night, she let me know that there was more to the story of my life, and ultimately the truth came tumbling down.
Wow. Yeah, teenagers can do that sometimes, but
they sure can.
Yeah, they can. Well, so that happened, and you dealt with it, and I guess you had to wrestle with some issues, correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And this is where that whole idea of counseling comes in, right?
Right.
Back then, people didn't know how much I suffered. I was kind of that. Actually, my parents describe it as the perfect kid, right?
Right.
I was the perfect kid in their eyes. Part of that is my personality, but part of that is also the fact that I wanted to hide how much pain I was in. If I was only, high achieving enough, good enough,
right,
well-mannered enough, nobody would know how much I hurt. And so inwardly, absolutely, I struggled. I did not want to be the girl who survived an abortion. I didn't want to feel the anger and the fear and
rejection,
the resentment, and
rejection too probably was some of your feeling. Yeah, just knowing you were attempted to be thrown away. That, I can relate with that too myself. In that I found out when I was about 20 years old, 23 years old, that my parents had seriously considered aborting me. I had an older brother, older sister. At the time, my mom was pregnant with me. My parents were talking about divorce, going to get divorced. My dad and his parents were pushing for me to be aborted. Mm-hmm. And my mom and her family said, "No way are you going to kill that little baby. We will raise that child if we need to. You're not going to kill that little baby." And that was what was needed to make it very definitive and for me to live. And they had me. They stayed together. They never got divorced. They had I had a younger brother. But when I found out about that at 23, I had to learn to forgive my dad, forgive his mother who is still alive. And it turns out I actually became my grandmother's, the one who wanted me killed, probably her favorite grandchild, in my opinion. A little biased, but I was there and I ministered to her on her deathbed, praying and reading scripture, but it was tough. How do you have to learn to forgive someone who premeditatively wanted you killed, murdered. And yet, through the Holy Spirit and the grace of God, we're able to do that. And I know you are able to do that. Now, you have a ministry where you speak, telling your story of God's deliverance and His work in your life and all the things that you went through in the healing process. You also do a lot of speaking. You have a book, You Carried Me, a daughter's memoir. Where can people go to get this information and be blessed?
Yeah, people can visit my website. It's just Melissa Ohden, OHDEN.com, or they can read through some of our ministry work with the Abortion Survivors Network, and that website is theabortionsurvivors.com.
Okay, wonderful. And I encourage people, if you want to help minister to someone who's going through these issues or something similar to it, I really encourage you to take a look at this website and the resources in the book. I know you'll be really blessed. I know you speak at a lot of pro-life fundraising events and gatherings, and I do that as well. And I love to do that. I love to share my story and the hope in Christ that we all have, including the healing that we have, both in terms of someone who has attempted to be aborted, but also many women who have a lot of hurt and a lot of scars themselves for the decision that they made to kill their unborn child, despite whatever the circumstances. So we encourage people to take advantage of these resources. Once again, to go to your website and to be blessed. Thank you very much, Melissa, for joining us on the show and for sharing your wonderful story and God's deliverance.
Thank you for all you do. God bless.
Take care. God bless.
One of my most memorable experiences was a girl who came in who was 18, felt like the only choice she had was abortion. She had her boyfriend and her family members telling her, this is what you need to do, but she really wanted deep down to keep the child, but she thought she had no other choice. And through counseling, through sitting with her and talking about her options, through the ultrasound, she eventually chose life for her child. Alpha is a pregnancy medical clinic, and what we do is we do counseling for girls that find themselves in crisis pregnancies. One of my volunteers found out that there was a space for lease in a building, a medical building in Vacaville. We knew that that building had Planned Parenthood in it. It also had 2 other places that we actually refer clients to, Community Care Clinic and also Vacaville Imaging. So it was a great fit for us. And we know that our clients, our potential clients, are going to Planned Parenthood. So we thought, well, we'll check it out. So the board president and I went to check it out. And when we went with the realtor in the building, little did we know till we got there, because there were 2 spaces for lease. The one that he showed us was directly across the hall from Planned Parenthood, literally 3 feet from their door. And when we saw that, we thought, that's got to be God. When a girl walks down the hall, the image that I got is she can go left or she can go right. And even the realtor at the time asked me if we would have a problem being across from Planned Parenthood. And I said, well, no, that's what choice is all about, isn't it? So we entered into an agreement with the landlord. The lease went back and forth a couple times. The landlord themselves wrote the lease for the building. and sent it to us. I signed it and I returned it to the realtor with the check for first and last month's rent that they asked for. And then 2 days later, I received a call from the realtor. I could tell he was uncomfortable when he called me, and he said, I've never had this happen before, but the landlord actually sent your check and the lease back and said that the deal is off. When the realtor gave us a reason in his letter, he said that they didn't like the terms of the lease, even though they're the ones that wrote the lease, and that we weren't a good fit for the building. We contacted the Pacific Justice Institute to help us in this case, and now we've filed suit against them.
Nonprofit charities that help women choose life deserve to be treated fairly and equally. And that's why we at Pacific Justice Institute have filed this lawsuit, to make sure that they get exactly that kind of treatment.
Well, it's important because we had to go through the same licensing as any other medical clinic in the state of California. And yet, for some reason, Alpha is not a good fit for the building. I believe God created us, and we're given life. We were designed by a creator. We all are very thankful our mothers chose life. We feel every girl that is pregnant should be allowed to see an ultrasound of what's happening inside of her body and make an informed decision. We know that we can't make the choice for her, but we do know that with ultrasound, about 90% of clients will end up choosing life for their child.
And folks, if you'd like to support the Pacific Justice Institute on either a one-time or a monthly basis, it's really easy to do that. Just go to our website, pji.org. That's P for Pacific, J for Justice, I for Institute.org. And there you can also sign up to get our regular updates. I love for people to pray for our work. We at Pacific Justice Institute really understand that. We appreciate that. And the best way to pray for us is to know what we need prayer for, and that's by getting our Legal Insider, our weekly Legal Insider. Just go to our website, sign up to get that. And also, for those of you who decide to become a regular monthly supporter or give a one-time new gift donation to PJI, guess what? We have a wonderful matching gift program this month. It's matched dollar for dollar. In fact, if it's a monthly donation, it's not just matched for the first month, it's matched for the next 12 months. So this is a great opportunity to support the work of the Pacific Justice Institute on either a one-time or a monthly basis. Just go to our website, pji.org, P for Pacific, J for Justice, I for Institute.org, pji.org. Now, we have with us on the line our Chief Counsel Attorney, Kevin Snider, to talk about a very important case we're involved in the state of Maryland, dealing with a public displayed cross. Kevin, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you.
Now, Kevin, this is a very important case. But before we talk about how it's pending for the Supreme Court, I want people to understand the facts of the case. Tell us about this cross and why there's even a conflict involving this cross.
Yeah, this is called the Peace Cross in Bladensburg, and it's a 40-foot memorial cross that was privately paid for and erected to commemorate 49 men from Prince George County, Maryland, who gave their lives for their country in World War I. And these men ranged from ages 18 to 51. And so this is a cross that is on a third acre, I would call it a parklet. It's between sort of like an intersection or in the highways. And in the 1920s, money was raised to put up thousands of memorial crosses across the country. Many people may have come across these in rural areas. And lest we forget, that generation of Americans, there are 4.7 million Americans served, and close to 117,000 died. Most of those within a period of 100 days, so it was very shocking.
Oh yeah, that is very shocking. So our nation was shaken by that. Lives were lost, families were torn, and they decided to erect this cross for the purpose of remembering and recognizing those who gave their lives for our freedom. And this has been around for a long time. So why the rub now? Why is there a problem now?
Well, the American Humanist Association is the problem. They sued the Maryland National Park and Planning Commission, claiming that the memorial was a violation of the Establishment Clause.
Okay, so they decided to contest this. Were there any plaintiffs involving this who were living or who have lived in that close community, and or is this really just an outside group coming in to try to sterilize the marketplace and public places of any semblance of spiritual hope for those who've passed away and the families and relatives of those who passed away?
The American Humanist Association is a national organization, so what they typically do is they are, yes, outsiders, but they will often have members within a community who are atheists, and they use that membership as a way to get legal standing in the courts.
Okay, and so that's what they did, and they want to get rid of this cross. Why are they objecting to it? It was paid privately. It was for a valid public purpose, which is recognizing those who died. Is it because it's on public land? Is that their argument?
Yes. Well, in 1961, it was the Park Service took it over in Maryland, and so they're claiming that, well, this is a cross, and it what they call Latin cross, and so therefore it's a government respecting of religion, and they say that violates the Establishment Clause.
So how did Pacific Justice Institute get involved in this case?
Well, as an organization, PJI is a constitutional law firm, and we have a very strong organizational interest in the development of the law in this area. And so we, as you know, we have some excellent attorneys in Virginia who draft many of our briefs for the Supreme Court. And we asked that if they'd be willing to represent PJI on this. And they filed 2 briefs. And so the first brief was what they call in support of a petition of certiorari. In other words, the hardest part of getting something to the Supreme Court is the Supreme Court accepting it. And so
right.
they filed a petition on that.
Right. Now, the Supreme Court did accept the case.
They did. And so they filed a second brief for us on the merits.
Okay. Now, what did they argue in this brief? What was their basic points to say that this is constitutional, that the cross should not be torn down after being put up by private individuals originally?
Well, it goes back to the original understanding of the intent of the Constitution, particularly the First Amendment. The Establishment Clause says that Congress shall make no law, quotes, respecting an establishment of religion. And the American Humanist Association has really read out of that the word establishment. They're saying essentially that anything respecting a religion is violation of the First Amendment. We disagree with that, and we look historically to what the first Congress did when the Bill of Rights was ratified. And here's just some examples. We said, look, the first Congress paid for a chaplain. President Washington issued the first Thanksgiving proclamation, and Congress approved the use of the Capitol building for regular church services. So those things are an accommodation of religion. They're not an establishment of religion.
Right. And accommodating religion is very different than the government saying, okay, we're going to establish a religion, or we're going to endorse a certain denomination, have the Church of America be this denomination. I mean, that was what the real problem was back then. Is the Americans said, we don't want like the Church of England, we don't want the king bullying around clergy for in the American church. We want there to be a protection of churches from the government, and yet we have organizations like this that are coming in saying, no, we basically want to sterilize faith and religion and accommodation of religion from the public square. And I think it's just totally turning the whole concept of religious freedom on its head, particularly when the First Amendment also respects the free exercise of religion and the ability for individuals to express themselves, as I think they did when this cross was put up by and paid for by private individuals.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And as to symbolism, I mean, the lower court found the cross unconstitutional because it's a Christian cross, but religious symbolism was used back in the 1780s. If someone were to take out a dollar bill and they flipped over the backside, many listening will say, well, I'm going to be pointing to the "In God We Trust" national motto. But in fact, if you look at the left side, there's a seal, the United States seal, and it has a pyramid with a eye on top. And the artist who designed that, his name was Charles Thompson, said that the eye represents the all-seeing eye of providence. It's in the shape of a pyramid to represent the Trinity, and then it has the Latin words "Annuit Septis," which means God has He has favored our undertakings. So the early founders used religious symbolism, and there was no sense that this was establishing a state religion. And so we think that our position is very strong, and we hope that the Supreme Court will adopt it.
Yeah, now in looking at the justices on the Supreme Court, we had a little change recently. And, I know it's hard to predict what the outcome is going to be. But what is your gut reaction to this in terms of what you think we're going to be seeing from the Supreme Court? Do you think we've got the votes on the Supreme Court now with Kavanaugh to likely prevail in this? Or do you see the possibility of us being surprised with an adverse ruling?
If we get an adverse ruling, my gut is that it won't be from Kavanaugh. As you know, we were in front of him when he was in the D.C. Circuit, and an atheist challenged the court cry, "God save the United States," in this honorable court. Justice Kavanaugh, in that case, we were the only organization that would wrote to defend that. The Department of Justice would not. But in any event, he wrote separate opinion, concurring opinion, as to why that court cry was proper and didn't violate the Establishment Clause. So I think he's very solid on these issues.
Right. And so this court will likely look at the facts that in fact there is a valid secular purpose. It was to recognize those who had passed away in a war. It's indisputable what the intention was for this cross and the purpose of the cross. And I think that will likely weigh in very heavily in their decision-making. What do you say?
I think so. I mean, the cross is a universal symbol of the sacrificial death of Jesus Christ. Everybody knows that, but is often used as a borrowed symbol for war memorials because it carries the concept that the fallen soldier's death has redemptive meaning, and thus the sacrifice is not in vain. And I think that the common sense understanding will prevail in this.
Yeah, I think you're right, Kevin. I really do. And I encourage people out there, to keep up with these cases, keep up with these things that are going to the Supreme Court. Take nothing for granted. And also, pray for the president, pray for Congress as we have more justices being appointed to the court, not just the federal district court and circuit courts, but also the Supreme Court in the future as well. We need justices that respect the Constitution as we at Pacific Justice Institute work more aggressively than ever to bring these cases before the United States Supreme Court. Kevin, thank you so much for the work that you're doing in the Pacific Justice Institute team, and God bless you as we continue to move forward.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. So, folks, there you have it. It's our God-given freedoms we're talking about. Now, let's choose to keep them. I'm Brad Dacus of the Pacific Justice Institute. Have a great weekend.